Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in American history. Before we start, please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. We want to know where these documented accounts go and what times of day or night they happen. The Holloway plantation was like a fading memory on the edge of Savannah, Georgia. By 1875, it was no longer the best place in Chatham County to grow cotton. The once white columns had turned yellow with age. The paint on the shutters had peeled off like dying skin, and the big oak trees that lined the entrance drive seemed to bend lower each season, as if they were slowly giving in to gravity's pull. When Augustus Holloway, the last plantation owner, died in the winter of that year, the people in the area thought that his huge fortune would go to distant family members or maybe be given to the new university. People didn't expect that Eliza, Holloway's only daughter, would get the whole estate. The Chatham County Register of Deeds has court documents that say Augustus Holloway's will was read on the 27th of January 1875 at the offices of Barton and Whitmore, a well-known law firm that served many of Savannah's oldest families. That day, Augustus's lawyer, Edwin Barton, the estate's executive, Judge William Bartlett, and three distant cousins who had come from Charleston hoping to get an inheritance were all there. Eliza Holloway was the last to arrive. She wore black bombazine that made a noise like autumn leaves when she sat down in front of Mr. Barton's mahogany desk. Savannah society didn't think Eliza Holloway was the perfect heiress. At 32 years old, single, and described in the records of the time as a woman of substantial figure, she had long been the subject of whispers behind ornate fans and over crystal glasses of sherry. The Savannah Daily Herald Society, pages from 1870 to 1874, say that she turned down invitations to at least 27 social events, including the famous Street Cecilia Society Ball, which even the most reclusive members of Savannah's elite thought they had to go to. She didn't go to many gatherings because she liked being alone with her books and her father's huge collection of interesting things. The sudden inheritance changed her from a quiet single woman to one of Georgia's richest women overnight. The will itself, which was kept in the county archives until 1947, was notable for being both short and very specific. Augustus wrote only this after the usual introduction. To my daughter Eliza Catherine Holloway, I give all my worldly possessions, properties, and financial holdings, with the only condition that she stay in the family home and continue the research detailed in my private papers. If she fails to do this, all assets will be sold and the money given to the Medical College of Georgia to help with physiological studies. What happened in the months after Augustus Holloway's death would become one of the most disturbing stories in Chatham County's history. Local officials tried to cover it up. The church refused to acknowledge it, and it would eventually be buried in the Georgia Historical Society's archives until a fire in 1962 accidentally revealed documents that should have stayed hidden. Ida Mae Johnson, who was the head housekeeper at the Holloway estate for 17 years, said that Eliza came back from reading the will in a very upset state. Johnson later told investigators, "She went straight to the master's study and stayed there until well after midnight. We heard drawers opening and closing, papers rustling, and then silence for almost an hour. When she came out, her face was as pale as cemetery marble, but her eyes burned like I've never seen before. She looked through me instead of at me and said, 'Father has left me more than I imagined.'" Eliza fired all 14 of her household staff the day after the will was read. Judge William Bartlett later wrote down what people said. He said that only the elderly groundskeeper Samuel, who had worked for the family for more than 40 years, was allowed to stay. However, he could only go to the outer buildings and gardens. Former servants of the house said that Eliza had all the doors' locks changed and heavy drapes put up over all the windows, making the mansion always look like it was twilight. Gregory Winters, the locksmith, wrote in his business ledger that Miss Holloway had asked for locks that were very complicated for both the study and the attic door. He had to order special keys from a company in Philadelphia to make them. No one saw Eliza Holloway for 3 weeks. The only signs of life at the plantation were the occasional plume of smoke coming from the kitchen chimney or the shadow of a person moving behind the thick curtains on the upper floor. Neighbors said they heard strange noises all night long, thuds and scrapes that sounded like furniture being moved, and sometimes they heard what sounded like a woman's voice talking loudly, but no one ever saw anyone come or go from the property. According to Barton's General Store's ledger, Eliza made an unusual order on the 18th of February, 1875. She wanted 12 blank leather-bound journals, 6 bottles of high-quality ink, 20 pounds of candles, and a brass scale that could measure grains exactly. James Barton, the owner, wrote next to the entry, "Miss H's first visit since her father's death. Strange requests." Later, Thomas Wilson, the delivery boy, told the Savannah Gazette that when he brought the packages to the door, he smelled something strange coming from the house, like wet earth and vinegar. He also said that Eliza's looks had changed a lot in those 3 weeks. Her face was pale and drawn, but her eyes were feverishly bright. The article quoted Wilson as saying, "Most disturbing to young Wilson was Eliza's hand when she reached for the delivery." He described seeing strange dark stains beneath her fingernails and a peculiar tremor in her movements. She held her fingers splayed oddly, Wilson recounted, as though uncomfortable in her own skin. And when she spoke, her voice seemed to fluctuate between her natural tone and something deeper, more resonant, almost masculine in quality. At first, Wilson's story was dismissed as the dramatic embellishment of an imaginative young person, but within days, others who met Eliza reported seeing the same things. The postmaster, who was bringing Eliza a box of books she had ordered from a Boston bookseller, said she looked both smaller and bigger at the same time. Her face was thinner, but she seemed more important in some way. He also noticed the strange smell, but he thought it smelled like the inside of a doctor's bag, which is both medicinal and organic. The tax records from 1,875 that were found show that Eliza did not try to take care of her father's business. Cotton fields were left alone, trading partnerships ended, and offers to buy parts of the land went unanswered. Jacob Mercer, the foreman of the plantation, said he called the house at least 5 times to talk about important things that needed to be taken care of. Eliza only agreed to talk to him once, and when she did, she didn't seem interested in the money issues he brought up. Instead, she asked strange questions about the physical traits of different field workers. Mercer told Judge Bartlett that she asked specifically which men carried their weight in their abdomen and which men carried it in their limbs. She also asked if the more morally upright workers were more likely to be overweight or underweight. Eliza seemed more interested in something inside the house than in running the estate. Neighbors said they heard hammering and furniture scraping at strange times of the night. Reverend Thomas Grayson, the local minister, wrote in his personal diary that he had tried 3 times to offer Miss Holloway his condolences and spiritual guidance, but each time she turned him away. On his last visit, he wrote that he saw Eliza through a gap in the curtains, hunched over what looked like a big book and making notes so intently that she didn't notice him on the porch. He wrote, "Her posture was very strange, like 2 people were sitting in the same chair and fighting for control of the pen." By April, rumors started to spread around Savannah. Some people said that Eliza had gone crazy with grief, while others said that something more sinister was going on, like that she had found out her father was in a lot of debt, or that the fortune was just a big lie. Some people who believed in superstitions said that Augustus Holloway had gotten his money in a bad way and that his sins were now affecting his daughter. No one could have guessed what was hidden in the attic of the Holloway mansion. The truth would only start to come out after the events of the 14th of June, 1875, when a plume of black smoke was seen coming from the main house on the plantation. Tobias Green, a tenant farmer whose cabin was closest to the main house, said that the fire started shortly after 8 p.m. Green reported hearing what he described as a woman's scream, though strangely doubled, as if 2 voices cried out in the same throat. He looked at the mansion and saw light flickering in the windows of the east wing. Then, all of a sudden, a burst of flame broke the glass. Green's 4-year-old son, who had been sent to ring the alarm bell in a nearby village, said he saw Samuel, the groundskeeper, on the road. The old man was running away from the plantation, holding something close to his chest. Samuel didn't answer or slow down when the boy yelled. He just disappeared into the darkening night. According to the fire department's records, they got to the Holloway plantation around 9:17 p.m. At that point, the east wing was completely on fire. Firefighters saw Eliza Holloway standing still in the garden through the thick smoke. One firefighter said she looked completely vacant, as if her spirit had left her body. Eliza is said to have only said, "The ledgers are burning now, let them burn." When Chief Firefighter Harrison came up to her, Harrison said that she then gave him a small brass key and fell unconscious on the wet lawn. Harrison's report included a strange detail. Even though Eliza was close enough to the fire that her clothes were singed and her hair showed signs of heat damage, her skin felt unnaturally cold to the touch, as if it had been chilled from the inside. Medical records from Savannah General Hospital show that Eliza was unconscious for almost 36 hours after the fire. Dr. Edward Littlefield, the doctor who saw her, noted a number of strange symptoms. Her pulse would race and then slow down. Her breathing would not follow a regular pattern, and most strangely, the fat tissue under her skin seemed to shift when touched, moving without any control from her muscles and feeling almost like fluid. Dr. Littlefield asked two of his co-workers to help him, but before they could look at the patient, Eliza woke up. Martha Simmons, the nurse on duty, said that Eliza woke up suddenly, gasping for air like she was coming up from deep water. "Is he still inside me? Has he burned?" were the first words she said, which were written down in Simmons's personal journal. The firefighters were able to save most of the mansion's structure, but the east wing, which had Augustus Holloway's private study and the entrance to the attic, was badly damaged. Fire Inspector James Crawford made the first of many disturbing discoveries during the investigation that followed. Crawford's official report from the 16th of June, 1875, says that he first thought the fire was arson because it was so intense and spread so quickly. The east wing had burned much more completely than it should have, with some areas turning to ash while others stayed almost untouched. One thing that stood out was a circular pattern of complete incineration in what used to be Augustus Holloway's study. It was a perfect ring about 6 feet wide, and all that was left inside was fine white ash. Crawford found a hidden compartment with a metal box behind a fake wall in what was left of Augustus Holloway's study. There was a leather-bound ledger from 1837 inside, the year Augustus Holloway bought the plantation for the first time. As expected, the ledger didn't have any financial records. Instead, it had detailed notes on what Augustus called the manifestation of physical humors and their relation to moral character. The first entries were just standard observations about different types of people and their temperaments, nothing more than the pseudo-scientific theories that were popular among educated men at the time. The notes had become more experimental by 1840, though. Augustus wrote down a number of extractions from different people, starting with blood and then moving on to other bodily fluids. He had started to focus only on adipose tissue, or human fat, by 1845. He thought that this tissue held the essence of a person's character and moral fiber. The ledger kept track of Augustus's growing skills in getting and storing fat samples, as well as his notes on the people from whom they were taken. Early records talked about unnamed slaves, only giving their number and physical traits. Eventually, as his theories changed, he started to sample from a wider range of people, including business partners, household staff, and eventually members of Savannah's elite society. One entry from 1852 that was especially disturbing told how Augustus had gotten samples from Judge Carleton at a dinner party. He did this with a walking cane that had a hollow needle hidden in its handle. Augustus said, "The unusual density of the judge's fat shows how strong his morals are. The sample stayed solid, even when it was heated, which made other samples turn into liquid. At first, the local government thought the journal was just the strange writing of an amateur scientist. But when they used the brass key Eliza had given them to open the attic door, they found something that couldn't be explained and that shook the very foundations of what they thought was possible in a civilized society." The attic of the Holloway mansion covered almost the whole length of the house, and the ceiling followed the roof's peaks and valleys. When investigators first came in on the 16th of June, 1875, they were struck by two things: the oppressive heat trapped beneath the slate roof and the overwhelming smell, which was the same smell of earth and vinegar, but 10 times stronger. Inspector Crawford's official report said that the attic had been turned into a laboratory of most unusual design. There were hundreds of glass jars on shelves lining the walls, each with a date on it that went back nearly 40 years. A lot of people would later talk about and deny what was in these jars. The jars held things that were different colors and thicknesses, ranging from pale yellow to deep amber. Some were clear like oil, while others were cloudy and opaque. Each had a paper label with a date, a name or ID, and a series of notes written in a small, neat hand. One said, Thaddeus Marsh Hoggarty, glutton, adulterer, high viscosity. Another said, Merriweather E., kind, calm, quick crystallization. A long wooden table that had been used for years and was now scarred stood in the middle of the attic. There was a brass scale that Eliza had just bought, a few surgical tools of different sizes, and a European-made microscope on top of it. There were sheets of paper all over the surface that had what looked like calculations and diagrams on them. All of them were written by Augustus Holloway. One page had a drawing of a person with anatomical details, with certain areas of fatty tissue highlighted and notes about moral concentration and essence potency. The second table, which was right under the room's only window, was the most worrying thing for the investigators. There were 12 leather-bound journals here that were just like the ones Eliza had ordered. Eliza's tight, methodical writing filled the first 11 pages. This was the work her father had started. The 12th was open, and the last entry was from June 14th, the day of the fire. Next to the journal was a glass and copper tube device that linked a heating element to a series of collection vessels. The investigation report said that the device looked like it was made to heat up the contents of the jars, trap the vapors that were released, and turn them into a thick, oily substance. A small glass vial attached to the last condenser held about an ounce of a yellowish liquid that felt like rendered fat. The investigators, who were shocked by what they found and didn't know what it meant for the law, sealed the attic and told Judge Bartlett what they had found. The judge made an unprecedented decision after looking over the evidence. All records of the attic laboratory would be sealed, access to the property would be limited, and no one would be allowed to talk about the discoveries in public. In a private letter to Savannah's mayor, he explained his reasoning in a simple and disturbing way. The contents of that room and the implications of Holloway's research threatened not only the reputation of certain families, but also the very fabric of civilized society. Some knowledge is too dangerous for public consumption. What had Augustus Holloway been studying for almost 40 years? And what had Eliza found that made her so determined to keep doing his work? Those journals held the answers, but officials would deny they existed for decades. In 1962, the Georgia Historical Society found transcripts that showed Augustus Holloway had come up with a disturbing theory that human fat held the essence of a person's character, and that by extracting and studying this substance, one could find moral flaws, predict behavior, and maybe even transfer good traits from one person to another. The first things Augustus wrote in his journals were simple observations, like how people with similar body types might have very different personalities, or how a person's moral character often changed along with their physical form. Augustus owned a plantation and had complete control over the bodies of the enslaved people who worked there. This gave him plenty of chances to make observations and eventually do experiments to test his ideas. His first extractions, which he did in 1838, were simple procedures to take small amounts of subcutaneous fat from people who were not awake. Augustus carefully recorded the results of these early samples after they were put through a number of tests, such as being exposed to heat, cold, acids, and alkalis. He became sure that the fat of people who were morally good acted differently in these situations than the fat of people he thought were morally bad. His methods had gotten better by the 1,850 seconds. Augustus came up with a way to extract what he called moral essence from fat tissue using methods he said he learned from a French doctor he met while traveling abroad. The thick yellowish oil that came out of the process was then refined even more by being exposed to certain wavelengths of light, filtered through different mineral compounds, and aged in specially made containers. Investigators found that the jars lining the attic walls held samples from people who had worked on plantations, served as servants, worked with the family, and even family members over the years. Each one was carefully labeled with the date it was collected, the name of the subject, and notes about what they thought were their character traits. According to entries from the 1,860 seconds, Augustus's ultimate goal was nothing less than the physical transfer of moral qualities from one person to another. He hypothesized that by processing adipose tissue from individuals exhibiting favorable characteristics, integrity, intellect, and diligence, he could formulate a substance that, upon introduction into another individual's system, would amplify those identical attributes in the recipient. On the other hand, he thought that taking fat from people with bad traits and getting rid of it the right way could make the donor's character better. The entries from 1,873 onward were the most disturbing. Augustus started experimenting on himself by taking small amounts of his own fat and putting them through different chemical processes he had come up with. In his last entries, he wrote that he was more and more sure that he had found a way to distill what he called the essence of virtue into a form that could last after he died. The body is just a vessel, he wrote in a note from November 1874, just a few weeks before he died. The soul may depart, but the essence, that which truly defines a man, can be retained in physical form through proper extraction, concentration, and preservation. What makes Augustus Holloway can outlive the frail shell currently housing it. My legacy will not be merely in my name or bloodline, but in the transference of my very essence into a suitable host. It became clear from later entries that his daughter was the right host. Augustus's last journal entries explained that he thought Eliza's large body made her the perfect place to store his preserved essence. He had apparently been getting her ready for this role for years by giving her small amounts of his processed essence in her food and drink, getting her body ready for the full transfer. Eliza didn't get the money she thought she would get after her father died. Instead, she got this creepy legacy and the news that she had been chosen not despite her looks, but because of them. Augustus wrote that he thought his daughter's large body made her the perfect vessel for his life's work. Her body, which could store a lot of fat, would be the living repository for his experiments. Eliza's own journals, which she started writing just a few days after her father's death, show how horrified she was at first when she found out about his research. Over time, though, she became more accepting and even excited. The first entries were very angry. Father's work is an abomination before God and man. I should burn these samples and destroy his notes, erasing all evidence of his madness. But her tone changed a lot in just a few weeks. I start to get what Father had in mind. She wrote in early February, "The body is a vessel, not just for the soul as the Bible says, but for something more real, the distilled essence of character, intellect, and will." At first, Father's methods were repugnant, but they turned out to be the groundbreaking work of a mind that was too advanced for his time to understand. By March, Eliza was doing her own experiments, improving her father's methods and seeing how his preserved essence affected her. She wrote down changes in her appetite, sleep patterns, and thought processes. She also wrote down more and more often when she felt her father's presence inside her, not as a supernatural visitation, but as a physical feeling of having two minds at once. "I feel him beneath my skin," she wrote in April, "not as memory or imagination, but as a presence moving through my tissues and slowly becoming part of me. Sometimes I find my hand writing words I didn't consciously choose, or my voice saying things that seem to come from outside my mind. I am becoming a vessel for two consciousnesses, my own and Father's, occupying the same physical space." The last few pages of Augustus's journal described a way for Eliza to get her father's preserved essence out of her body and process it, then put it back into her own body. This would make sure that both his physical and moral existence would continue. It seems that Eliza had been trying to make this process better in the months after her father's death. Eliza's last journal entry describes the end of this process as a complicated ritual of extraction, purification, and reintegration that took place on June 14th under the light of the full moon. She was ready to finish the last step, fully incorporating Augustus's distilled essence into her own body. The entry, which was written in a style that switched between Eliza's neat writing and a more forceful masculine style, ended in the middle of a sentence. As the essence flows into my veins, I feel the boundaries between us dissolving. I am becoming both father and daughter, both creator and creation. We are. Investigators decided that Eliza had set the fire on purpose, in a moment of clarity, to destroy her father's research and end the horrible legacy she had inherited. But the question was still there. How much of Augustus's work had she done before she saw things clearly? And what happened because of those actions? Eliza Holloway was quietly sent to the state asylum for the insane in Milledgeville after the attic laboratory was found. Records show that she stayed there until she died in 1888. She never had visitors and refused to talk about what happened on the plantation. The official cause of death was listed as general physical decline, but asylum physician Dr. Jonathan Wells wrote in a private letter that Eliza's body went through strange changes in her last months that he couldn't or didn't want to record in official records. Mary Blackwood, an asylum attendant who took care of Eliza in her last weeks, wrote a letter to her sister that went into more detail. Miss Holloway's condition defies medical explanation. Though she eats very little, her weight changes dramatically, sometimes gaining or losing 10 pounds overnight. Her skin has developed an unusual texture, like softened wax, and seems to shift and settle when she stays still for long periods. Most disturbing are the moments when she appears to argue with herself, her voice alternating between her natural tone and a deeper masculine register that sends chills through all who hear it. The most disturbing part of Blackwood's letter was the part about Eliza's death. As her last breath left her body, those of us there saw something strange happen. Her flesh seemed to ripple from head to toe, as if something were moving beneath the surface, trying to get out. For a moment, her features seemed to change into a masculine face that several staff members later said looked like pictures of Augustus Holloway. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the likeness disappeared, leaving only Eliza's empty shell. After Eliza died, no one lived on the Holloway plantation. The state eventually bought the property for back taxes, but attempts to sell it at auction failed over and over again. People who lived nearby said they saw strange things happening around the mansion, like lights in the windows of the empty building, strange smells in the air, and a constant feeling of being watched that even the most skeptical visitors couldn't shake. If it weren't for the fire that destroyed part of the Georgia Historical Society in September 1962, the Holloway case might have stayed hidden. While cleaning up damaged items, archivist Margaret Chen found a sealed metal box in the rubble. There were copies of the original investigation reports, a few pages from Eliza's journals, and a set of daguerreotypes showing the attic lab inside. Chen, knowing how important the materials were to history, tried to get them known to the public through academic channels. In early 1963, she sent the Journal of Southern Historical Research her article, Scientific Aberrations in Post-Civil War Georgia, the Holloway Case Study. It was quickly turned down, and Chen was quietly let go from her job at the Historical Society. Chen wrote to a colleague at the University of Pennsylvania in March 1963 to express her frustration. The rejection cited insufficient historical documentation and excessive reliance on sensationalist elements. Yet the editor refused to examine the primary sources I offered to provide. More troubling was the visit I received from two gentlemen claiming to represent the Georgia State Historical Commission, an organization that, to my knowledge, does not exist. They questioned me at length about how I had obtained the Holloway materials and who else might have seen them. Their manner suggested less academic interest than concern about containment. But one copy of Chen's manuscript got to Dr. Howard Winters, who teaches anthropology at Columbia University. Winters was more interested in the psychological parts of the case than the supernatural ones. He started a careful investigation into the Holloway family's past, using his academic credentials to get access to records that had been kept secret from the public. Winters found a pattern of strange events that had happened to the Holloway family since Augustus's grandfather, Thaddeus Holloway, came to America from England in 1787. Records showed that Thaddeus had been a doctor in London before leaving suddenly in a way that made it look like he had done something wrong at work. Letters to co-workers talked about research and procedures that weren't approved and were beyond the pale of medical ethics. What Winters found out made the story seem both more and less strange than it did at first. He found out that Augustus Holloway had been an amateur scientist who was especially interested in how the human body works. Records from the University of Pennsylvania show that Augustus went to a number of lectures on the new field of endocrinology when he visited Philadelphia in the 1840 seconds. It was especially important that he went to a talk by Dr. Thomas Silliman, whose controversial research on glandular secretions and how they affect temperament had been mostly ignored by the medical community. Silliman's ideas about the biological basis of personality traits, the idea that moral traits might have biological parts that could be studied and separated, gave Augustus a way to plan his later experiments. Winters also found proof that Augustus had written to several European researchers who were looking into the link between physical traits and behavior. This research would later become the discredited field of phrenology. These links made it clear that Augustus's theories were strange, but they came from real scientific research of his time. Winters made a big discovery when he found letters between Augustus and a Swiss doctor named Heinrich Lamrecht. Lamrecht's work on tissue transplantation had been kept secret because of ethical concerns. Lamrecht's letters, which he wrote between 1851 and 1858, explained how to keep organic material alive outside of the body and how to put foreign tissue into living hosts without the body rejecting it. Lamrecht's research primarily concentrated on prospective medical applications, whereas Augustus's responses indicated his interest in the philosophical ramifications, particularly the potential transfer of aspects of the donor's personality alongside the physical tissue. The most telling thing Winters found out was about Augustus Holloway's medical history. The Augusta Medical College records show that Augustus was diagnosed with a progressive neurological condition in 1870. This condition was most likely Huntington's disease, but it wasn't officially named until 1872. The symptoms, cognitive decline, personality changes, and movement disorders would explain why his research became more and more erratic in his last years. Dr. Martin Reynolds, who looked at Augustus in 1870, wrote in his private journal, "Mr. Holloway shows the classic signs of hereditary chorea, the same disease that affected his father in his last decade. What worries me most is how he reacted to the diagnosis. Instead of giving up or being sad, he seemed almost feverishly excited, saying that the degeneration of his body made his other research even more important. He talked about transferring the essence before the vessel fails, which sounds more like delusion than rational scientific inquiry. Eliza's role in her father's work changed in important ways as well. Letters between family Dr. Samuel Harding and a colleague in Charleston show that Eliza had signs of the same neurological condition as early as 1874. Her weight gain, which was once thought to be due to simple gluttony, was now seen as a sign of her illness. This illness would have made her more vulnerable to her father's influence as her cognitive abilities got worse. In this light, the fire at the plantation may not have been a time of moral clarity, but rather an accident caused by Eliza's worsening health. The strange changes that the asylum doctor saw before her death were similar to the later stages of Huntington's disease. Even as scientists worked to figure out what happened in the Holloway case, some things still didn't make sense. A chemist from Savannah was said to have looked at the things in the attic jars, but they were never clearly identified. The chemist's report, which was found with Chen's other things, said that the substance was organic but had properties that were not typical of biological compounds. The daguerreotypes of Eliza taken while she was in Milledgeville were the most upsetting. The first one, from 1875, showed a woman whose large body fit the descriptions of women in Savannah society. But by 1880, Eliza looked very different then, with hollow cheeks and bones that stuck out, but her medical records showed that her weight had stayed about the same, which suggested that the change was more than just losing weight. When we looked closely at the later pictures, we saw other strange things. Small changes in the shape of her skull, the way her jaw was set, and most importantly, her eyes. One person said they looked like they had two gazes, one looking at the camera and the other looking inward, as if they were watching something below the surface. Dr. Winters went to his office in 1964 after giving a talk about his research at a private academic conference and found that his research materials were missing. He was denied access to the original Holloway documents, and coworkers who had initially shown interest in the case suddenly stopped being available to talk about it. A little while later, Winters took a job at a university in Switzerland and never talked about the Holloway case in public again. But a former graduate assistant later said that Winters had kept looking into the matter on his own, keeping a coded journal of what he found. This source says that Winters found descendants of Samuel the groundskeeper, who stayed at the plantation after Eliza fired the other staff. They live in rural Georgia. Their family's oral history included stories about Augustus's experiments that matched the written evidence, as well as other details that were too strange for Winters to put in his academic papers. One of these stories said that Samuel saw Augustus getting his body ready after he died. Augustus had trusted servants give him a series of injections and cuts based on written instructions. This was meant to preserve and concentrate what Augustus called his moral essence, so that it could be passed on to his daughter. It was even more disturbing to think that this process had worked at least a little bit, and that something of Augustus had really lived on in Eliza, slowly changing not only her behavior, but also her body. In 1892, the Holloway plantation was torn down to make room for a paper mill. The mill ran until 1957, when it was left empty. Local newspapers say that workers who were tearing down the building complained of headaches, nosebleeds, and vivid nightmares. Several people refused to keep working at the site because there was a strong smell of dirt and vinegar that fresh air couldn't seem to get rid of. In his work diary, Foreman Jacob Wilson wrote, "The east wing where the fire had been presented particular difficulties. The remaining timbers seemed impregnated with an oily substance that resisted cutting tools and gave off noxious vapors when heated. More troubling were the effects on the men who handled this material. All developed a tremor in their hands that persisted for days, and several reported experiencing brief moments of disorientation, describing the sensation as someone else looking through my eyes." The paper mill that was built on the land never made any money. There were unexplained equipment failures, a lot of employees leaving, and ongoing problems with the quality of the paper itself. Customers complained that it smelled bad and changed color quickly. When the facility closed in 1957, people in the area called it the cursed mill because they thought its problems were caused by the land's history. Thomas Blackwood, a chemistry graduate student, said in 1967 that he had gotten a sample from one of the original Holloway attic jars through contacts at the Georgia Historical Society. His analysis, which was published in a little-known academic journal and then taken down by the university administration, suggested that the substance contained cellular structures that were not found in any known human or animal tissue. These structures seemed to respond to electrical stimulation, even after being preserved for almost a century. Blackwood wrote in his lab notes, which he later shared with a colleague at MIT, "Under the microscope at 400x magnification, the sample reveals what can only be described as a network of microscopic sacs or vesicles, interconnected by filaments finer than any nerve fiber. When subjected to mild electrical current, these structures exhibit coordinated contractions, suggesting some form of communication between discrete parts. Most remarkable is the sample's response to proximity with fresh organic material. The network orients itself toward living tissue, the filaments extending in an apparent attempt to make contact." Blackwood went missing not long after the paper was pulled. There was nothing in his apartment except for a handwritten note that said, "It moves of its own accord now." He was never found. But unconfirmed reports said he was in a small village in Eastern Europe, where he was supposedly still doing research under a different name. His research assistant said that Blackwood had done one last experiment the night before he went missing. He had tried to put a tiny amount of the Holloway sample into a laboratory mouse using methods he learned from Augustus's journals. The assistant, who asked to remain anonymous in all future interviews, described the results. At first, the mouse didn't seem to be affected, but within hours it started acting strangely, trying to make its nest bigger, hoarding food in amounts that were too much, and taking postures that looked almost human. By morning, its physical appearance had changed slightly. Its body mass had shifted, and its eyes had developed an awareness that was deeply disturbing. When Tom saw these changes, he didn't show the horror or concern you'd expect. Instead, he seemed fascinated, even envious. His last words to me were, "It's working exactly as Holloway described. The vessel is being prepared." The sample and Blackwood both disappeared, but some traces were found in a small glass vial that had broken on the floor of his lab. The government ordered the lab to be cleaned and sealed because they were worried about possible biological risks. The assistant who saw the experiment started to have symptoms similar to those reported by workers who tore down the Holloway mansion: headaches, tremors, and feelings of being disconnected. These went away after a few months, though. The land where the Holloway plantation used to be is still empty today. Over the years, there have been many proposals for development that have been made and then withdrawn. Most of the time, these proposals were based on environmental concerns or zoning issues. People who know the history of the property say that soil samples taken from the area have strange qualities, the most notable of which is that they can hold heat for a long time after being taken out of the sunday. Patricia Delaney, an environmental engineer hired to look at the site in 1998, noted several strange things in her report. She wrote, "Core samples from the area where the mansion's east wing stood contain traces of organic compounds not typically found in soil. These compounds have structures that are similar to lipids, but they also have molecular arrangements that are not found in any known biological system on Earth. What worries me more is that they seem to be able to move around on their own when they are isolated in solution, which is something I can't explain using any known biological mechanism." Delaney's report was sent to the county planning office but was later taken out of public records. When asked about this removal, county officials said that the document had been lost during a normal process of digitizing it. Delaney herself didn't want to say anything more about her findings. She took a job with an environmental company in Alaska soon after she sent in her report. A very bad storm in 2011 caused flooding that revealed part of the foundation where the east wing of the mansion would have stood. Workers from the County Historical Preservation Office, who were sent to document the find, said they found a small metal container wedged between two foundation stones. There was a single page inside that looked like it had been ripped from one of Eliza's journals. It had a message that was hard to understand. "Father says the essence must be willingly given to retain its virtue, yet what he took was never given. I feel him now, spreading beneath my skin, reaching for my thoughts. The scale no longer measures truly. The weight remains the same, yet I am less and less myself. By fire, perhaps what is taken can be returned to ash, but will the scales balance then? Will I be more or less than what I was? I leave this record, though I know it will be denied. The truth weighs heavily, yet leaves no impression on the scale." For a short time, the Georgia Historical Society kept the page before moving it to an unknown location for special care. People have asked to see the document many times, but it has always been denied. But a picture taken by one of the workers briefly went viral online before being taken down from all sites. People who looked at the picture said that the handwriting changed halfway through the text. It started out clearly feminine and ended up being heavier and more angular by the end. Before the photo was taken down, neurologist Dr. Eleanor Simmons said it looked a lot like cases of foreign accent syndrome and other neurological conditions that make it hard to write. The change in handwriting could be a sign of a dissociative episode, or even more troubling, the presence of two separate motor control patterns in one person, as if two people were trying to use the same hand at the same time. In a final, perhaps fitting end to the Holloway case, a descendant of Samuel the groundskeeper who had stayed at the plantation after Eliza fired the other staff, came forward in 1968 with a family heirloom, a small glass vial with what looked like a yellowish, semi-solid substance inside. Family stories say that Samuel took it out of the attic the night of the fire because he thought it was valuable. The vial had been passed down through generations, with strict instructions never to open it. It had a paper label in Augustus Holloway's handwriting that said, AH Prime Essence Distillation No. 9 for final integration. The family had kept the vial for almost 100 years, keeping it sealed in a metal box wrapped in cloth that, according to family tradition, had been blessed by a local conjure woman to bind what's inside. Jeremiah Wilson, Samuel's great-grandson, was the one who finally decided to bring the vial to the public's attention. In a statement to the Atlanta Constitution, he said, "For generations my family has carried this burden, knowing that something terrible was in that little bottle. My grandmother told me stories of how on certain nights you could see movement within the substance, and how the metal box would sometimes vibrate as though something were trying to escape. I've decided to break the silence because I believe there are answers here, not just to what happened at the Holloway plantation, but to deeper questions about what makes us human and what might continue after death." A private collector bought the vial, but their name has never been made public. But people who were involved in the transaction said that when they put the vial on a scale, it showed a strange property. Its weight changed slightly, as if something inside was moving on its own. Even more disturbing, several people said that when they held the vial, they felt like they were being watched, but not from the outside, but from inside their own bodies. Dr. Malcolm Phillips, a biophysicist who was allowed to look at the vial for a short time before it was sold, wrote in his private journal, "Whatever the substance inside may be, it seems to have properties that are not consistent with inert material. Under polarized light, it shows patterns of organization that are similar to neural networks. When the temperature changes slightly, it changes not only its state of matter, but also its apparent volume, expanding or contracting without following normal physical laws. Most interesting is how it reacts to being near living tissue. When held in the bare hand, the substance seems to orient itself toward the holder, pressing against the glass as if it wants to touch it. We may never know for sure what Augustus Holloway was really doing in his experiments, or how much Eliza found in that attic. What is left is a disturbing idea that some types of legacy go beyond just passing things down, that some hungers last longer than the body that first felt them, and that some scales measure values that go beyond the physical. Since the Holloway documents were found again, a strange thing has happened to several families in Georgia. People who worked, served, or did business with the Holloway plantation have had strange physical changes. They gain weight quickly and then lose it dramatically, even though they haven't changed their diet or exercise. Medical tests show nothing out of the ordinary, but the people said they felt like something was moving inside them, as if something under their skin was moving on its own. Dr. Camille Richardson, a geneticist who has looked at 5 of these cases, said that there were consistent patterns across people who were not related. The subjects have strange fat distribution and movement. Fat deposits seem to move across the body in ways that don't follow known physiological processes. Tissue samples show cellular structures with increased mitochondrial activity and new membrane characteristics that aren't found in standard medical literature. The most worrying thing is the reported psychological effects. Periods of dissociation, adopting mannerisms and speech patterns that are similar to 19th century formality, and in 3 cases, the emergence of memories that seem to predate the subject's birth. Richardson's attempts to publish her findings were met with resistance from medical journals, which cited methodological concerns and insufficient documentation. After that, her research funding was cut, and she was not given another year at Emory University's medical school. She said in her last departmental address, "There are some doors that science is not yet allowed to open, not because we lack the technical ability, but because what lies beyond challenges our basic understanding of human identity and continuity." The Holloway case suggests that the lines between people may be more flexible than we want to believe. The dreams that these people have are the most disturbing. They dream of an attic full of glass jars, a brass scale that changes its measurements when no one is looking, and a woman whose body is home to 2 minds that are locked in a silent battle for control. Many people say that when they wake up, they smell a brief, fleeting scent of earth and vinegar before it disappears into the morning air. One person, who asked to remain anonymous, told paranormal researcher Diana Mitchell about their experience in a recorded interview. "It always starts with the feeling of weight, as if my body has become impossibly heavy. Then I feel movement beneath my skin, like bubbles rising through thick liquid. In the dream, I'm always climbing a narrow staircase, heading toward a door I both dread and want to open. Behind it, I know is the answer to why I sometimes speak in a voice my wife doesn't recognize. why I find myself writing in a hand that isn't mine, and why I crave foods I've never tasted in my waking life. The dream always ends the same way. I reach for the doorknob, and as my fingers touch the brass, I hear a woman's voice whisper, "We are never truly alone in our bodies." Mainstream publishers turned down Mitchell's research, which was put together in a manuscript called The Holloway Legacy: Biological Memory and Transferred Consciousness. However, it got a lot of attention in academic circles that study consciousness and the philosophy of identity. Most scientists dismissed her main idea that Augustus Holloway had accidentally created a crude way to transfer consciousness through biological means as speculative fiction. However, her documentation of consistent experiences among individuals with no prior knowledge of the Holloway case poses challenges to conventional explanations. Historical authorities in Georgia still do not officially recognize the Holloway case. Maps of historical sites don't show the plantation. The county's biographical records don't mention Augustus and Eliza, and the Historical Society's inventory says that the documents found in the 1962 fire are misplaced. Dr. James Harrison, who was the director of the Georgia Historical Society from 1977 to 1989, wrote a private letter to a colleague about the omission. Some aspects of our regional history are best left unexplored, not because the truth would be too painful or embarrassing, but because it might prove too destabilizing to our understanding of human nature. The Holloway matter falls into this category. The documented evidence, which I have reviewed personally, suggests possibilities that contradict our most basic assumptions about identity and mortality. History, to remain useful, must confine itself to narratives that, however disturbing, remain within the boundaries of what we accept as possible. But the story lives on, passed down from generation to generation in whispers instead of official records. It lives on as a warning story about inheritance, showing how what we get from those who came before us can be more complicated, burdensome, and life-changing than just money or property. People in Chatham County still tell their kids not to go near the empty lot where the plantation used to be. People in the area believe that people who stay on the property for too long sometimes come back different, speaking in old-fashioned ways, having new interests, or losing or gaining weight for no apparent reason. People from outside the area call these kinds of stories superstitions, but people who live there say that no development has ever gone beyond the planning stages on the property, even though it is in a great location and the county offers economic incentives. The experiences of journalists and researchers who have tried to look into the Holloway case in the last few decades may be the most telling. Many people talk about a pattern of small blockages, like missing appointments with sources, audio recordings that don't work right, and photos that develop with strange blurs or distortions. Some people say they have health problems while they are investigating, such as insomnia, digestive problems, and in a few cases, unexpected weight gain in the stomach area. Writer Michael Donovan spent 3 years researching the case for a book that was never published. He said, "The more I looked into the Holloway story, the more I changed in small ways. My handwriting became more formal, my speech patterns changed. I started craving foods that were popular in the 19th century, but that I had never heard of before. What was most disturbing was the growing sense that my research was being guided, not hindered, but directed by some influence I couldn't identify. I would find myself drawn to certain documents and lines of inquiry, as if following a trail left just for me. It felt less like I was uncovering a story than being absorbed into it." Donovan gave up on the project after having what he called a moment of clarity while going over his notes one night. "I realized that scattered throughout my writing were phrases and sentences I had no memory of composing, yet they were undeniably in my handwriting. These passages contain details about the Holloway case that I had never uncovered in my research, described with an intimacy that suggested first-hand knowledge. It was then I understood that in investigating the Holloway legacy, I had somehow become part of it, another vessel for something that had never truly died. That might be why people who visit the empty lot where the Holloway plantation used to be often leave feeling heavier than when they got there. It's as if something they can't see has attached itself to them, something that doesn't show up on any physical scale but weighs on their soul with an undeniable presence. And maybe that's why people who live in the area say they see a light moving across the empty field on nights when there is no wind. When they get closer, The light turns out to be nothing more than the reflection of moonlight on a brass scale that is perfectly balanced on the uneven ground, measuring weights that no human eye can see. In the end, the most unsettling thing about the Holloway case might not be what Augustus learned about the physical properties of human essence, but what his work says about the nature of identity itself. If consciousness can be transmitted biologically, and if aspects of our identity are embedded within our tissues, then the distinctions we recognize between individuals may be more fluid than we are willing to accept. We may never really die. Instead, we may just spread out, with our essence absorbed by others, and our consciousness breaking up and coming together over generations, creating a continuity that goes beyond our understanding of life and death. As Eliza wrote in her last journal entry, which was found in the ashes of that fateful fire, I understand now what Father sought, not immortality as religions conceive it, but continuity through dissolution, the breaking of boundaries between vessels. What terrifies is not that we die, but that parts of us may live on in ways we never imagined, inhabiting others who believe themselves whole and singular when they are in truth composites of countless absorbed essences. We are none of us purely ourselves. The scale does not lie. We weigh more than the sum of our physical parts.